something a little different this morning. I'm gonna preach a little message, and I'm gonna ask for a bit of a response, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a little bit. But we're looking at a psalm that I've just fallen in love with, Psalm 124. It is in your bulletins. I'm reading from the ESV this morning, but it's 8 verses that are just absolutely beautiful. Psalm 124, the Psalm of David, a song of ascents, something that they would have sang as they went on pilgrimage up to Jerusalem. And we read this, it says, "If it had not been for the Lord who was on our side," let Israel now say, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrents would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth." This is the word of the Lord. This is a psalm, as you can see in the superscript in your Bible, of David. And it's a psalm in which he opposed, having looked back at both the real and the potential disasters from which God delivered him and protected him. And it's a very straightforward psalm in a sense. He kind of uses repetition over and over. So you'll see in verse 1 and 2, he says the same thing. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, then, verse 3, we would have been swallowed up. We would have been devoured. Then, verse 4, the flood would have swept us away. Then, verse 5, over us would have gone the raging waters. And then verse 6, but blessed be the Lord. Verse 7, twice, we have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken. We have escaped. And the conclusion, our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. And so, I don't think you need to get that wound up about what this psalm is about. To me, it is quite self-evident. David's point is quite clear. It's simply this: having the Lord on our side makes all the difference in the world. Having the Lord on our side makes all the difference in the world. Or another way to put it is, what a radical difference it makes to have the Lord on one side. With the Lord on one side, victory is sure. With the Lord on one side, all things are possible. With the Lord on one side, our footing is sure and secure. If God is with us, it doesn't matter who is or isn't with us, because God is with us. If God is for me, it doesn't matter who is against me. It doesn't matter if my friends have forsaken me, because I can and will stand victorious because God is on my side. It's been said, because 1 plus God equals a majority every time. Now, to be clear, and to avoid misapplication, when we say the Lord is on my side, we're not saying that God's going to bless everything we do, because he's not our servant. He's not our errand boy. He actually doesn't exist to bless our agenda and fix our mistakes. I'm reminded of, when the Holyfields and went out and they would fight, and it was like, God's on my side, or, sports, God's on, no. I think you're missing the point. That's not what this is about. He doesn't exist to bless my agenda and my plans and my dreams. He's not a God who is for sin. He's not actually a God who is for ideas that aren't his own. But he is on the side of his Son. And he is on the side of his Spirit, and he is on the side of the church. We know that he's on the side of, and he is for salvation. He is on the side of, and he is for deliverance. He is on the side of, and he is for redemption. He is a God who is for our transformation, into the image and likeness of his Son. He is a God who is for healing. He is a God who is for wholeness. He is a God who is for the church and the advance of the gospel. He's a God who is for the advance of light and the full-out and full-scale assault against the forces of darkness. He's for all of that. And we know that he's for us and with us in difficult circumstances. Even though we go through the valley of the shadow of death, he is with us. He's even with us when we're in bad circumstances that are of our own making and our own stupidity. He may not be on my side at all times, especially when I do things that are sinful or misguided or out of step with him. He may not be on my side, but I know this beyond a shadow of a doubt. He is always by my side. I know that for sure. That is true. He is both by my side and on my side. And therefore I can be confident that he will never leave me, he will never forsake me, he will never abandon me, he will never betray me. I can sing with the psalmist, out of my distress I called upon the Lord, and the Lord answered me and set me free. The Lord is on my side, I shall not fear. What can man do to me? We can proclaim with Paul in Romans 8:31, if God is for us, who can be against us? If God is for us, who can be against us? Paul just says earlier in Romans 8 that God is working all things together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. According to Zephaniah, the Lord our God is in our midst. He's among us. He's with us. He is a mighty one who will save. God is by the side of his people. God is with his people. God is for his people. And we see this when he leads them through the Red Sea. We see that he's by their side when they go round and round the walls of Jericho. He's even by their side and on their side when they're sent into exile. He was there by their side when Saul persecuted the church. He was there by their side. He was standing in heaven watching as Stephen was stoned to death. He was there when Peter was set free from prison, and he was there as we read, or Sarah read for us, when Paul and Silas were dragged through the marketplace, brought before the magistrate, and thrown in prison. He was there by their side in Acts 16 as Paul and Silas stood in prison singing hymns and praying to God. And God was there and sent an earthquake so violent that it shook the very foundations of the prison, causing the prison doors to fly open and the chains to come loose. God was there. The Bible tells us that God is by our side. He is with us when there's conflict in the church. What does he say? When 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I will be with them. When Christians are persecuted, when Christians are thrown in jail, Scripture says, God's on your side. You don't need to worry about what you're going to say. You don't need to worry about being anxious. I will give you the words to say. I will be in you and with you, and I will speak through you. Matthew 10:19. When the accuser himself seeks to condemn us, we don't need to worry. Because Jesus Christ, our brother, our advocate, our intercessor, stands beside us and pleads his righteousness, his blood, and silences and shuts the mouth of the accuser. God is on our side. If it weren't for the Lord, if God weren't on our side, Pharaoh, Cyrus, Sisera, Nebuchadnezzar, Caesar, and Satan would have all had the last laugh, but they didn't because God was on the side of his people. How then do we know that God is on our side when everything's collapsing? When we're suffering? When things aren't good? When everything's going wrong? How do we know that even then God is on our side? What do you think? Paul says in Romans 8:32 that God did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. So how then will he not also, along with him, that's Jesus, graciously give us all things? We know God's by our side. He won't hold back because he didn't hold the very most important thing in the world back, his only begotten Son. And so that causes David to exclaim, "Blessed be the Lord," in verse 6. Say, we've escaped Like a bird, we've escaped. The snare is broken, we've escaped. And then he concludes, our help is in the name of the Lord. Our help is in the name of the Lord. He's delivered us. He's saved us from the snare of Satan. He's saved us from the schemes of the evil one. He has rescued us from darkness and death. He is our help. He is our refuge and our strength, our ever-present help in times of trouble. And so the question that I have this morning and I want you to think about is this. Again and again, David says, this is the psalm that the pilgrims would sing, if it had not been the Lord, or if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side, if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side, if it had not been for the Lord. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be doing that sentence. How many times have you heard, if it wasn't for God, I would have never made it through that time when? If it wasn't for God, I don't know where I'd be today. And we say that. Not just Christian talk. Is it? I know people, I've watched people that are precious to me, people that are dear to me, and I've watched them go through times of trial and tribulation. I've watched storms hit. I've watched life knock their feet out from under them, and I've watched them do it without the Lord at their side. And I can tell you how it went for them. I can fill in the if. For many of them, they were devoured. They were drowned. What David says in verses 3, 4, and 5 actually came true for them. They were devoured by addiction and regret. They were devoured by hatred and anger. When the storms hit, they themselves were hit by a tidal wave of misery and despair. And I've watched as some of those people tried to do it without the Lord, and they have never recovered. They were never the same and aren't the same because they didn't have the Lord. Don't for a moment think that David is simply talking in fancy metaphors, that he's simply being poetic when he says, the flood would have swept us away if it weren't for the Lord. The torrent would have gone over us. For David, this meant something. For the people of Israel, this meant something. And for us, these words mean something. I've watched those who didn't have the Lord, and I've watched as their legs were cut out from under them. I've watched as their businesses have failed, as they were betrayed by a loved one, as a marriage fell apart, or death took someone that was very special to them. And tragedy overtook these folks. Tragedy swallowed them alive. Addiction ensnared them. I've watched those who didn't have the Lord, and after the storm fell into a very deep depression. I've watched those who didn't have the Lord, and not only did they lose their health, but they lost their peace of mind. They became bitter, they became angry, they became resentful and unforgiving. And so the question is, what would I do without the Lord? Well, I can answer that. You can't do it without the Lord. You will drown. You will be devoured. You will be swept away. And so we can say along with David, thank God, blessed be the Lord. Because of him, I haven't been given over to despair. Thanks be to God. In him is my hope. Blessed be his name. Because of him, because he is on my side, the enemy will not have the last laugh. Because of him, the storm and the flood hasn't swept me away. Because of him, I can stand. Because of him, the snare is broken and I have been set free. I've escaped. Because of him, I have hope. If it hadn't been for the Lord, when I look back at my life and I ask that question, if it hadn't been for the Lord, I would say, well, if it hadn't been for the Lord, at 8 years old, my parents were not people of faith. They wouldn't have sent me to a program called Awana. You guys have heard of Awana? I was 8 years old. In their mind, it was babysitting, and I got to have a lot of fun. But they always kind of get you, those churches. Like they advertise all the fun stuff, and the relay races and you eat ice cream out of eaves troughs. But then they break like 3/4 of the way through and they're like, okay, now that we've had fun, let's go to the Bible. Which probably is a good thing. Put it that way. But that's what they do, and they break off into these studies, right? And I remember for a few months while I was part of Awana, it wasn't that long, I was in an old church basement, about as old as the one downstairs, and they started doing the Bible thing. I was in it was Braves, that's what I was in, and there's these verses that they get you to memorize, right? So they start yelling the main ones, like John 3:16. And I remember at 8 years old, there came a day, and they always try to push you to make a decision right before like they close out the season or whatever it is. And I remember the youth leader there says, does anyone want to ask Jesus into their heart? And I said, I'll ask Jesus into my heart. And so, he led me through what I can only assume, I don't remember, would have been the sinner's prayer. And I asked Jesus into my heart, and I remember feeling just this flood of warmth come over me. And he asked me, he said, did you feel anything? Did anything happen? I said, yeah. Like, I feel warm all over inside. I've never forgot that was 1988. And I went, and they tell you what every good church would tell you, go home, tell your parents. So I went and told my parents, and they got me to meet with the pastor one Sunday and tried to get us in church, and that didn't happen. But we got a Bible from the Salvation Army. I got to pick my own, and I thought black looked cool. And so I'd be rocking this Bible. I didn't know that it was a King James Bible. You laugh, but don't buy your kids. I couldn't read it. And then I did it wrong. I started with Genesis, which was great, until I got to the line of Seth, and then I got to the genealogies. And then I started in Chronicles because I thought Chronicles of Narnia. I'm not even joking. Like, if you give a kid who doesn't know how to use this book, and they want to start at the beginning, Chronicles was terrible. I just opened it up to Chronicles, and you have a kid that's trying to read Shaw, the son of like some guy's name, and some guy, I'm not going to do this because you're going to be like, Brian doesn't even know how to pronounce names. Like, try doing that at 8 with no exposure to the scripture, so I just stopped. But if it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have made that prayer. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have met Melanie in grade 12. I had a very specific, I was just going to start asking girls out, and so that's what I did. And she was pretty high up on the list, and I asked her out, and she said yes. And it was on a Friday, I remember. I kind of hung around like a creep, waiting for her to come to the locker. And I asked her out, I'm like, you want to go out? And I can remember her kind of just banging her head against the locker. I remember that. She was trying to knock some sense into herself, but she said yes. And I gave her my number to call me, and she actually didn't call me. But I knew her last name, Dirksen. And I called every Dirksen in the phone book. No joke, asking for Melanie. She stood me up. Turns out, no joke, their parents were unlisted. You think that this is even like, I realize this is funny now, I'm not even making this up. And then she comes to school on Monday and has a note, and just hands me the note. And the note says I'm a terrific guy, which I believe. But she wouldn't date me because she only dated Christians, right? Like her youth group had groomed her well. She'd gone through all of them, I guess. And we got to be unequally yoked or something. And so I was a little dejected, but I got with my friends, and they said, well, I keep moving down the list. And I said, no, she didn't say no. She said she only dated Christian guys. So that week, I went and got my dad's suit from the closet, and I started going to every church in Surrey that I could find. If they had a prayer service, I would go. I just started going to church. Then one day, I didn't even know where she went to church. They heard about this guy that was going to their youth group at her church who was interested in the Lord. And she started going out with me. Which, beware, parents. Wolves in sheep's clothing, I tell you. 3 years later, we're married. Brian's still not going to church. Like, I went to church to do the premarital counseling and all that, and then that kind of stopped. And 6 months after we're married, I was part of the Fish and Wildlife program at BCIT, which was subset of the forestry program, but a specialized part, and I dropped out of that and went to work in a steel foundry. I'm working in a steel foundry, which gives you a lot of time to reflect on your life. And this is one of the only times I think I've never heard more clearly from God, but this thought kept going through my mind over and over again: Bible college, Bible college, Bible college, Bible college. Just wouldn't stop. It was kind of weird because I wasn't going to church, none of that, and told my actual family, and they told me I was nuts because they said, Bryan, you're not a religious person. Like this doesn't make sense. But if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't have gone to a little Bible college in Langley called Christ for the Nations to try and apply. They told me to come back in a year. They no joke. They said, like, okay, well, like, where do you go to church? And I said, I don't go to church. And they said, okay, what ministry have you been involved in? We don't realize how crazy our language sounds to people. I heard ministry and I thought, why does me working for the government have anything to do with me applying to be in a Bible college? They said, you can't have drank or smoked in the last year. And I said, I guess I'll be back in 364 days. And they said, have you had an Acts 2 experience? I had no idea what they were talking about. They were asking if I'd been filled with the Spirit. They asked what church I was going to. I looked at them and I said, I don't go to church. And the one piece of advice that was good that they gave to me, because they told me I'd have to wear a suit at school, which was just ridiculous. They said, go to a church, find a church. If it wasn't for God, if it wasn't for me going there, I would have found the church. We went to a church close to home called Parkland Fellowship. It's a Fellowship Baptist church. David Reagh was the pastor there. He's now our regional director. The first Sunday we walked in the door, he cornered me, and he said, you got to come to our small group. And I said, great, because I think I need to go to Bible college. Well, they got me in their small group, and they realized they had a lot of work to do. I hadn't been baptized or anything like that, and if it wasn't for the Lord, I had a conversation. He said, do you believe in the Lord? And I said, yeah. He said, do you believe you've been raised from the dead? It took me a long time to actually get to the place where I could say and be honest with myself that I believe that Jesus was raised from the dead. And I finally got to that place where I believed he was Lord, King, he was raised from the dead, and David said, you got to get baptized. And I said, no, I need some time. They said, time for what? And I said, I got to read the Bible first. I got to get some other stuff sorted out. He told me I was an idiot. And he said, the Bible's very clear. The first step of faith and obedience is baptism. So, let's get that straight. And I looked at him and I said, okay, you're the pastor. And so if it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have been baptized on July 30th, 2002. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have become an intern at the church and been involved with children and youth. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have gone on to do a BA at Columbia Bible College in Biblical Studies. I interned with Baptist Housing, which is a big supporter of our fellowship, as a chaplain to explore the calling as a chaplain. And then I went on and did a 3-year MDiv program at Trinity Western out of Acts Seminary. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have made it through some of the most difficult years of my life and Mel's life in our early 30s. If it wasn't for the Lord, we wouldn't be married today. If it wasn't for the Lord, I would have walked away from the church. If it wasn't for the Lord, I would have sought revenge many times over. If it wasn't for the Lord, I would be a very angry person. And if it wasn't for the Lord, I would be subject to Satan. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't be here. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't have had the privilege this morning to celebrate Ed. If it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't be here in Smithers having the time of my life. I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to complete this sentence, if you want, and share. If it wasn't for the Lord, I. If it wasn't for the Lord, I. I asked one of my good friends in Vancouver this week this question. I said, I'm thinking about doing this. Let's just take a run at this. If it wasn't for the Lord, what would be different about your life? And his answer surprised me because he didn't answer about his life. He said, if it wasn't for the Lord, my sister's life wouldn't be what it is today. He said, if it hadn't been for the Lord, she would not have the quality of life that she has today. He said this, he said, years ago when she was just a young lady, I'm assuming a teenager, she had her insides, he said, were messed up, and her gallbladder was bad, and The blood test that the doctors did, they came back and they said it's all bad. It's real bad. And we know this, we have to do surgery, we have to operate. And after the operation, life for her is never going to be the same. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff she can't eat, and her quality of life will be diminished, but we need to do surgery in order to save her. And he said, Bryan, our whole church, which would have been Emmanuel Fellowship Baptist, was praying. Our immediate family was praying. And our entire community, the Church of God, came together and prayed. And she went back to the doctor, and they looked at her and said, there's no problem. She's been healed. We can't explain it. And he said the best part was, they looked at her and they said, we have no medical explanation for why she is now whole. We can't explain it. Because everything's normal. It's a miracle. And he said, Bryan, if it hadn't been for the Lord, my sister's life wouldn't be what it is today. She is a beautiful young lady and full of life. I want to ask you the question. I'm going to invite you to share. Because this song is a communal praise song. It's David's story of what life would be like if the Lord was not on his side. if the Lord wasn't around. It was Israel's song that they sang as they remembered God's past acts of deliverance and how that impacted their present. But this is our book. These Psalms are for us as well. This is our prayer manual. This is our praise manual. And what was true for them is true for us. We should be able to say, if it wasn't for God, I fill in the blank. I want to open it up to you guys to just stand up where you are and share. If you feel that, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if it wasn't for God, I. So I want you to start. If it wasn't for God, I. If it wasn't for God, you wouldn't be able to stand.
Well, if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be saved. I wouldn't have the strength I have, and I wouldn't have the joy I have. I was raised in, and I don't talk about it openly a lot, but I was raised in a very abusive home. But for whatever reason, God spoke to my mother's heart. And one day she decided, when I was about 11 years old, that she had to take our family to church. And it was so clear in her heart. And so she did. And it was just me, and it was just her. And it was the Salvation Army Church that she decided to go. And that was God's doing. And because of that, I ended up going to a youth group retreat, and I gave my heart to the Lord. That was all God's doing. And because of that, I ended up getting a whole new family that I found love and joy in. And because of that, I found joy later on because I found my husband at Bible college. And through there, I found in his family an amazing support network. That was all God's doing. Because exalt, so when I seek him and follow him and trust him, I don't, he's personally delighting in me and communing with God. That's the sweetest thing on earth. So if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't have that joy. And for me, that's the sweetest thing in the world.
One of the things that, thank you very much, Lisa, that you might not have heard, and you're supposed to do this on Facebook, they put down their beloved family dog of how many years?
12 years.
Mhm. And you know how difficult that is for a family. It does speak to the joy of the Lord that even when a family is grieving, someone would stand up on a Sunday and simply give God praise. Even when he takes away, we bless his name. Lester.
If it wasn't for God, I don't know how we would get through the loss of a loved one.
Mhm.
Whenever I'm at a funeral, I wonder how people make it through it without absolutely losing their mind
Mhm.
at that loss. But I think with the Lord on our side, we somehow find a way through.
Okay. You gotta raise your, like wave that banner, Reagh, like none of this half measure stuff.
I had a really bad problem with anger growing up. I grew up in a Christian home, but the church went through 2 splits and had all kinds of bad things going on. And things were a little bit dysfunctional at home. Those who know me would that's an understatement. But I had a lot of anger. I didn't want to surrender my life to the Lord because I saw the mess that the church was in, and people were saying, they were like God, and they were behaving like God, and I thought, no. And I think trust is a really important thing, and when you want to put your trust into the Lord, I said to the Lord, you have to be able to handle my life. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to have a lot of things to question you about and that kind of thing. And, even before I reached that point, I'd become a Christian to the fire escape of hell kind of thing. It says you don't go to hell, but I did not want to surrender my life to the Lord because I saw people in church were bickering and angry. They weren't letting the Lord reign in their life, but I didn't understand that. And so I had a lot of anger. And so much anger, I know I would have led me to him. It was fury. It was rage and fury. And the Lord's done a lot of work over the years. He's helped me to understand how patient he's been, even when I've been wrong about a lot of things. And I've been angry or judgmental. I wouldn't say it out loud, but the Lord knows what's going on, so you can't hide it from him. But he's still doing a lot of work, and I just really thank him that he really turned around my hatred for love. And it's a genuine love. It's not, and it's a reaction to his love. It's a reaction to his healing. And so if it wasn't for the Lord, there wouldn't be me.
You might not be alive, well, so. Not to make light of that, Reagh. We're going to transition back into the song in a second here. And in a moment, I'm going to invite the team back up. But I shared this with the Leroy and Ed this morning as we prayed. This is Psalm 46, out of the King James. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though the waters thereof roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with the swelling thereof. There is a river, the streams whereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacles of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her, and that right early. The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, and earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. He maketh wars to cease unto the ends of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Team, you can come up. I'm going to just say a few words as you guys come up, and you're going to lead us in our next song. We've talked about how God is on our side, how God is on the side of his people, how God is with us, how God is for us. And we've talked about the difference that makes. But let me ask you this now. Are you with him? Are you on his side? God is on the side of his people, so the question becomes, are you one of his people? Have you been born again? Have you believed in his name? Are you obedient to his will? When he tells you to do something, do you do it? Do you listen? If God points in a certain direction, do you head in that direction? Because if you don't, you're on your own. And you're all alone. Are you on his side? Because we know that he's on our side, and we're going to sing some songs about that, and then we're going to remember the ultimate reminder that God is on our side as we celebrate the cross and what Jesus did there.